Snow had fallen in a quiet, determined fashion upon Hollybrook village, a place so quintessentially English that it appeared painted rather than built. The hedgerows were crowned in white, the church spire stood like a sugar, dusted candle, and every window glowed warmly against the cold twilight like a lantern welcoming Christmas itself. Hollybrook was not large, one main street, a village green, a church named St. Edmund's, a modest tea-shop called Rose and Hearth, a post office, and a scattering of cottages that bore names instead of numbers, Snowdrop Cottage, Thistle End, Bramble Row, and the like. Beyond the green, up a winding hill, stood Evergreen Manor, the pride of the district, an old stone estate owned by the respected yet enigmatic Colonel Arthur Whitcomb, a retired military officer in his late 60s whose posture still suggested a parade ground, and whose moustache could be considered a national treasure. Inside the manor, preparations for Christmas were under way. A grand fir tree stretched toward the ceiling, hung with glass ornaments, hand-painted angels, and ribbons of silver tinsel. Garlands of holly looped over oak railings. The air smelled of pine, roasted chestnuts, and the Colonel's preferred pipe tobacco, a robust, old-world fragrance that could strip paint, but warmed the spirit. The manor was hosting its annual Christmas gathering, an invitation, only affair that blended carol singing, parlour games, mulled wine, and the traditional reading of Christmas letters from soldiers the Colonel had once mentored. The guest list was always carefully curated by his housekeeper, Mrs. Beatrice Holloway, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who managed the manor like a battleship, ensuring that no cup remained empty and no slipper sat crooked by the fire. Among the guests were Edmund Crane, the manor's young secretary, late 20s, bespectacled, polite, painfully organized, and quietly ambitious. He idolized structure, lists, and the Colonel's signature seal. Victoria Hale, a glamorous London socialite, early 30s, the Colonel's god, niece visiting for the season, elegant coats, perfumed letters, and a subtle air of mischief followed her everywhere. Dr. Lionel Barrington Hollybrook's local physician, mid-40s, gentle voice, tired eyes, beloved by villagers, known for making house calls in any weather, even snowstorms. Agnes Toller, owner of Rose and Hearth Tea Shop, 40s, rosy, cheeked, warm personality, but with a talent for absorbing village gossip like blotting paper. Hugo Fletcher, wealthy antiques collector, early 50s, dramatic personality, florid speech, overly generous hand gestures, and a habit of loudly announcing his own importance. Margaret Sloane, a shy widow in her 60s, local resident, admirer of the Colonel's war service, quiet, observant, almost invisible unless addressed directly. Miss Jane Marple, our beloved sleuth, also in her 60s, staying in the village for Christmas with her dear friend Reverend Philip Ashford, Hollybrook's clergyman, who had invited her to attend the manor celebration as an honoured guest. Miss Marple arrived wrapped in a sensible wool coat, sturdy boots, and a knitted scarf the colour of winter berries. Her grey hair sat neatly beneath a soft felt hat, dusted with snowflakes like powdered sugar. She walked with her usual composed calm, leaning lightly on her umbrella, not for support, but principle. Umbrellas, she believed, solved more problems than people gave them credit for. The Colonel greeted her at the door with military warmth. "Miss Marple, my dear lady, snow has turned the whole countryside into Narnia, hasn't it?" "Oh, indeed, Colonel," she replied with a twinkle, "though I rather hope no fawns are lurking behind the bushes. They tend to frighten the vicar." The Colonel barked a laugh, delighted. She stepped inside, noting everything without appearing to notice anything at all, the best disguise for keen observation. The polished silver on the sideboard, the alignment of shoes by the fire, the secretary's carefully stacked folders, Victoria's unread letters peeking from her handbag, the doctor's medical satchel resting near the radiator to warm, Hugo Fletcher's quiet gaze tracking every movement from a distant armchair, the evening unfolded charmingly, carolers gathered by the tree, voices rising in harmonious cheer. Hugo Fletcher accompanied them on piano, softly competent, surprisingly good for someone so reserved. Mulled wine was served in glass mugs, the Colonel read heartfelt wartime letters, laughter drifted like warm smoke toward the chandelier, but beneath the glittering civility tensions existed. Miss Marple noticed the way Edmund Crane stiffened when Hugo Fletcher entered the study earlier, just for a moment, the slight narrowing of Agnes Toller's eyes whenever Victoria spoke of London wealth, the faint impatience behind Dr. Barrington's polite nods when Hugo theatrically corrected historical facts about his antiques, the Colonel himself showing a rare flash of irritation when a certain envelope was misplaced earlier, something Edmund hurriedly corrected with trembling hands. Hidden stories lived in every village. Hollybrook, despite its Christmas sparkle, was no exception. The inciting incident occurred near the stroke of 9, when snow tapped against the windows like polite knuckles requesting entry. Edmund Crane excused himself to fetch the Colonel's correspondence box from the study. Minutes passed, then came a sound, not loud, but distinct in the hush of snowfall, a thud, followed by silence. Dr. Barrington rose instantly. Victoria gasped. Agnes clasped her hands to her mouth. Hugo exclaimed something unnecessarily Shakespearean. The Colonel marched toward the study with brisk urgency, Miss Marple following quietly behind like an investigator already compiling mental notes. The study door stood slightly ajar. The Colonel pushed it open. Edmund Crane lay on the carpet beside the fireplace, face pale, glasses askew, one hand stretched toward a fallen folder, the other limp by his side. A half-finished cup of tea sat on the desk. Snow gathered faintly on the window-sill where the latch had been opened for ventilation earlier. Dr. Barrington knelt and checked the pulse. His expression shifted from clinical focus to something colder. "I'm afraid he's gone." A collective chill moved through the room, not from snow, but something far darker. The Colonel's voice was low, measured, dangerous. Cause? Barrington hesitated. "I can't say yet, but there's something unusual here." Miss Marple bent slightly, not dramatically, simply purposefully. She examined the teacup, the faint residue at the bottom, the unnatural waxiness of Edmund's fingertips, the way the secretary's meticulous folders had been disturbed, an anomaly in itself. "Oh dear," she murmured softly, "it seems Christmas has arrived with rather the wrong kind of surprise." And snow continued falling outside, soft, silent, and terribly indifferent. The investigation began before the body was even moved. Miss Marple believed that first impressions were fragile clues, best gathered before men in official boots trampled them into oblivion. The Colonel insisted on notifying authorities immediately. Agnes volunteered to fetch blankets and brandy. Victoria paced nervously. Hugo launched into speculation that contributed little but atmosphere. Margaret Sloane quietly made tea, her hands steadier than most. When the local constable, Officer Reginald Price, arrived half, buried in snow, stamping his boots at the entrance like a man entering a crime scene reluctantly scheduled on a holiday, Miss Marple greeted him with polite efficiency. "No need to ask where the body is, dear constable," she said gently. "Follow the scent of organizational tragedy." He blinked, "Beg pardon." "The study," she clarified. Price was new to village policing, but not foolish. He respected procedure, though he clearly resented it interrupting carols. He secured the study, took witness names, and attempted to reconstruct the timeline. But Miss Marple reconstructed people, which she found more revealing than timelines. She began interviews under the guise of casual Christmas concern. Interview one doctor. Lionel Barrington, the doctor, sat by the fire, coat drying, voice quiet but professional. You examined the tea. She asked conversationally. I did. He nodded. There was an almond scent beneath the tannins. Miss Marple sipped thoughtfully from her own cup. Cyanide, then, difficult to mistake. He stiffened, yes, but how did you villages teach one many scents? She replied with a smile. Barrington confirmed that Edmund had requested tea 15 minutes earlier. He himself had not prepared it. The teapot had been in the kitchen, managed by Mrs. Holloway. He also revealed something interesting. Edmund had seemed anxious, but trying not to appear so. Young men often grow nervous around Christmas responsibilities. She said, yes. He sighed, but this felt personal. Interview 2, Victoria Hale. Victoria was elegance, struggling to remain composed. Poor Edmund, she said, voice wavering like candlelight. He was loyal to Uncle Arthur, almost reverently so. Almost, Miss Marple repeated softly. Victoria hesitated. He admired the Colonel's authority, perhaps too much. She also mentioned that Edmund had been vying for a permanent London position, possibly with her assistance. But Hugo Fletcher had interfered earlier, loudly offering to mentor him instead. Victoria found Hugo tiresome, but harmless. Harmless people rarely smell of staging opportunities. Miss Marple mused. Victoria frowned. You suspect him. I suspect everyone, dear. It saves disappointment. Interview 3, Hugo Fletcher. Hugo stood dramatically by the window, snow reflecting his own inflated self-importance. I knew something was amiss, he declared. A death in the snow, very poetic, almost like a Russian novel. Let us hope the culprit is less poetic and more logical, she replied. Hugo revealed that Edmund had been managing sensitive documents for the Colonel, some involving antique acquisitions, insurance evaluations, and private benefactor dealings. Hugo had been hoping to appraise a certain artifact stored in the manor vault, but Edmund had denied him access earlier that afternoon, politely but firmly. A young man saying no to you, she observed, must have felt rather revolutionary. He sniffed. I dislike being thwarted. That, she said gently, is not yet a motive for murder. Interview 4, Agnes Toller. Agnes poured tea at her own shop earlier that day, and therefore knew tea better than most people knew their own relatives. I didn't make that cup, she insisted, but Edmund did stop by for shortbread. He asked me odd questions about bitterness in tea. Odd, she asked, like someone testing a flavour. Agnes said, lowering her voice. Like someone preparing for a performance. Agnes also revealed that Edmund had recently been handling a sealed will update for the Colonel, an envelope he guarded more tightly than rationed sugar. A will envelope appearing before a death is terribly cliché, Miss Marple murmured. Which is why someone might rely upon it. Interview 5, Margaret Sloane. Margaret surprised Miss Marple most. She was quiet, yes, but perceptive. I saw Edmund arguing, softly, with someone near the stables yesterday evening. I couldn't see who, only boots in snow. Miss Marple perked slightly. Boots' size, larger than his purposeful stride, someone accustomed to command. She also mentioned that Edmund admired Hugo's antiques knowledge publicly, but privately sought the Colonel's approval alone. The folders in the study had been meticulously prepared for a presentation that never occurred. Order disturbed is emotion exposed, Miss Marple noted. Study observations. Miss Marple returned to the study under permission, scanning the scene like a knitter spotting a dropped stitch. Clues gathered. The window was opened from inside, not forced. Tea sat half finished, but Edmund never left paperwork incomplete. Cyanide scent masked under almond bitterness. A will envelope missing from the correspondence box. Folders disturbed, unlike Edmund's nature, anxiety before tea, testing bitterness, argument near snow, covered boots by stables, no theft except the envelope, suggesting targeted removal. The Colonel's eyes narrowed when she mentioned the missing envelope. That was the updated codicil to my will. And who knew of its existence? She asked. Edmund, Mrs. Holloway, Reverend Ashford as witness, and possibly. He paused. Hugo Fletcher overheard. Miss Marple folded her hands thoughtfully. "Oh dear," she said gently, "it appears our snow is rather crowded with footprints after all. Snow hides tracks, but people hide motives better." The next twist arrived with the discovery of a second cup in the study bin, washed, dried, and discarded. A test cup, a tasting. Someone had sampled the tea before Edmund drank it, ensuring bitterness could mask poison. Hugo Fletcher immediately proclaimed this suspiciously artistic. The constable considered it evidence. Victoria considered it intrigue. Agnes considered it stupidity. Margaret considered it inevitable. A red herring emerged when Mrs. Holloway was discovered missing from the manor for precisely the 15-minute window before Edmund's death. The Colonel defended her fiercely, too fiercely, but Miss Marple noticed something. When accused, Holloway bristled, but when defended, she flinched. Another mislead came when villagers whispered that Victoria wanted London inheritance, suggesting she influenced the will. She denied it with credible affront, yet her letters contained job recommendations for Edmund, unopened, implying she had not yet intervened at all. A third twist came when a hidden ledger was found in the manor vault, listing expensive antique transactions managed by Edmund. Several items were insured at inflated values. The Colonel insisted Hugo had requested appraisal access earlier, suggesting Hugo was probing finances. Miss Marple quietly unravelled the misleads like knitting wool. The doctor diagnosed, but never poisons. The socialite recommends, but never inherits. The collector appraises, but never tastes tea. The housekeeper vanishes, but returns with cold cheeks, not guilt. The real secret surfaced when Miss Marple found a crushed almond essence bottle in the kitchen coal bin, hidden, not accidental. Someone used almond, sent intentionally to mask poison. The stakes rose when the Colonel revealed another detail. The will codicil disinherited a single individual due to financial dishonesty. And who was disinherited? She asked. The Colonel hesitated, then sighed. Hugo Fletcher. Gasps echoed. Hugo turned theatrical shades of insult. "I assure you, Colonel, my debts are artisanal, not criminal." Miss Marple smiled gently. "Artisanal debts still leave financial footprints, dear sir." But this, too, was a red herring, because Hugo loved accusation, attention, more than he loved silence. The real question was, who feared disinheritance being discovered before the Colonel announced it himself? Snow tapped harder at windows, and Miss Marple, quiet and sharp, began seeing patterns no one else could yet perceive. Christmas reveals truth under gentle disguises. Miss Marple deduced the pattern, poison masked by almond bitterness. Test cup prepared beforehand, only one item removed, the codicil. Culprit feared not blame, but disclosure. The Colonel's defence indicated protection, not alliance. Argument boots suggested command stride. Almond bottle hidden in coal, someone comfortable in kitchen access. Envelope removed to delay codicil discovery. The final deduction clicked like a knitting needle finding rhythm. The killer was not the disinherited, but the inheritor who feared competition. She confronted Colonel Whitcomb gently. "Colonel, may I ask, who inherits in Hugo's absence?" The colonel exhaled slowly. "My estate would pass to Mrs. Holloway in trust until my niece marries." "And who recently ended a broken engagement?" she asked. The colonel's eyes widened. "Beatrice Holloway." Miss Marple nodded softly. The confrontation was staged not with drama but logic. She asked the constable to check Holloway's coat pockets. Inside was a folded napkin stained faintly with tea, matching the test cup. Also found a railway ticket she never used, a deliberate alibi attempt. When confronted, Holloway broke, not into tears, but truth. "Yes," she whispered, "I poisoned the cup. Edmund discovered my debts before the codicil could be signed. I couldn't let him tell the colonel, not before Christmas." "But you could let him die before Christmas?" Miss Marple asked gently. Holloway's voice cracked. "I wanted control." "Order restored. Order built on murder is badly stitched," Miss Marple said softly. Snow outside softened again. Christmas inside felt colder, yet truthful at last. The resolution came not in cuffs, but closure. Holloway confessed fully. The colonel, though shaken, accepted truth with military dignity. Hugo, though wrongly accused, loudly forgave everyone as if the event had been arranged for his personal growth. Victoria quietly thanked Miss Marple, her first genuine sincerity of the season. Agnes served special remembrance tea at Rose and Hearth, ensuring no almond essence was allowed. Near the premises again, Margaret Sloane sat quietly at the piano that evening, playing carols softly for the village, competent, calm, observant, her hands steady, and Miss Jane Marple, wrapped again in sensible wool, watched snow falling on the green, restoring silence, footprints erased, but Ruth remembered. "A pity," she said gently to the vicar, "that snow removes evidence faster than people remove suspicion." Reverend Ashford nodded. "But it cannot remove your intuition." "No," she smiled, "villages never do." And Hollybrook restored its calm Christmas candles glowing warmly again, though everyone now looked at almond shortbread with respectful caution. The storm did not cease with the confession. Storms in villages rarely did. What changed was not the weather, but the texture of silence that followed the revelation. Snow still lay thick upon the lawns of Evergreen Manor, but now it seemed less like a picturesque Christmas blanket and more like a keeper of secrets, politely refusing to divulge anything further. The weight of truth, Mrs. Holloway's admission settled in the room like a mislaid ornament found too late, necessary yet faintly sorrowful. Colonel Whitcomb remained by the hearth, hands clasped behind his back. His face, usually the very definition of ruddy health and assured command, had grown lined and distant. He looked, for the first time that evening, less like a soldier and more like a man who had expected life to behave itself until the new year at least. Officer Price, notebook in hand, cleared his throat with procedural solemnity. "Mrs. Holloway, I must place you under formal arrest. However, given the weather and the season, I shall request that transport be delayed until morning." Holloway inclined her head, almost relieved to have instructions again. "Thank you, officer." Miss Marple observed this small exchange keenly. Relief was not always the sign of innocence, but it was often the sign of a person who had feared disorder more than consequence. The colonel turned toward her. "Miss Marple, I confess I find it difficult to reconcile the woman who managed my household for 20 years with the one who has just confessed to murder upon my Axminster rug. Oh, rugs have heard worse confessions. She replied mildly, and households have harboured stranger dualities. Human nature is remarkably consistent in its inconsistency. The Colonel considered this with a faint nod. Restoring narrative calm by 10 o'clock, the villagers who had remained in the manor were gently shepherded into the drawing-room. Agnes Toller, ever the unofficial chronicler of village emotion, sat dispensing tea with the grave attentiveness of a woman convinced tea solved not merely shock, but everything short of global conflict. Victoria Hale stood by the tree, arms wrapped around herself. I was quite certain this Christmas would involve parlour games, and perhaps one uncomfortable conversation about my marital prospects. I did not anticipate cyanide. No one ever schedules cyanide, Miss Marple noted. It simply turns up like an uninvited cousin. Hugo Fletcher, whose dramatic temperament had been unjustly indulged throughout the evening, swept into the drawing-room with the flair of a man who had recently enjoyed being suspected, forgiven, and vindicated, and who felt this entitled him to commentary rights for life. "Well," he announced, rubbing his gloved hands, "I must say, to be accused of murder is quite bracing. One feels seen." Agnes gave him a long, suffering smile. "Perhaps you might feel seen without the corpse next time, Mr. Fletcher. I do enjoy a little spectacle," he admitted. Miss Marple looked at him thoughtfully. "The trouble with enjoying spectacle is that one may some day become part of it." Hugo blinked, as though briefly unsure whether this was philosophy or a warning. The Colonel's codicil unfolded. The updated codicil, the very document that had set this tragedy spinning, was recovered from the study desk drawer, where it had been slipped beneath a blotter. Miss Marple had found it earlier, but saw no need to announce its presence until its emotional impact could be properly absorbed. The Colonel opened it slowly. The paper crackled faintly in the firelight. "I, Colonel Arthur Whitcomb, do hereby revoke all future appraisals, acquisitions, or insurance authorizations managed by Mr. Hugo Fletcher." Hugo made an offended noise, but waved it off with gallantry. "Understandable. I did attempt to insure a Roman vase for more than the Roman Empire's entire GDP. Miss Marple allowed herself a tiny smile, small, precise, and very satisfied, but the codicil continued. "Furthermore, I acknowledge the loyal service of Mrs. Beatrice Holloway, whose stewardship has preserved the manor through years of national difficulty. I appoint her trustee of the estate until such time as Miss Victoria Hale enters lawful matrimony, at which point stewardship transfers to her care." Victoria's eyes widened. "Oh!" The Colonel folded the paper again. "It seems, Beatrice, you feared not disinheritance, but irrelevance." Holloway swallowed. "Yes." Miss Marple's voice was gentle, but firm. "Murder is an extreme solution to career anxiety, Mrs. Holloway. I thought if Edmund told him about my debts before the codicil was signed, I would be dismissed before Christmas. The manor would know, the servants would know, the village would know." She exhaled. "So I chose a narrative I could control." "Ah," said Miss Marple, "control." The motive of every good housekeeper and every bad murderer. Village reactions and gentle reckonings. Villages thrive on gossip, but they survive on forgiveness. By midnight, Hollybrook had already begun its emotional recalibration. No one shouted, no one wept dramatically. Villagers simply adjusted, like people pulling coats tighter in unexpected wind. Reverend Ashford approached the Colonel quietly. "Arthur, my friend, there is grace even for crimes committed in fear." Colonel Whitcomb nodded, gaze on the flames. "I shall pray for her, Philip. But I shall also invest in locks for my correspondence box. Prayer and padlocks are a sensible pairing." Miss Marple approved of this sentiment very much. Margaret Sloane remained seated by the piano. her expression unreadable not from secrecy but temperament. "I always found the secretary far too young to look so tired," she murmured. "Now I know why." She glanced at Miss Marple. "You saw it before anyone else did, didn't you?" One does not reach 60 without noticing when a young man carries 50 years of worry in his briefcase. Miss Marple said quietly, "Symbolic closure, the Christmas candle the following morning, Hollybrook awoke to clear skies and unbroken snow. The world glittered innocently again, as though attempting to apologize for the previous evening's mismanagement. A small memorial was held, not for spectacle, but sentiment, at St. Edmund's Church. The Colonel lit a single tall candle by the altar, its flame steady, elegant, and unaccused. Miss Marple stood nearby, umbrella tucked beneath her arm, respectful though unnecessary indoors. Snow, she remarked to Agnes, who had joined her, is nature's attempt at editing. Unfortunately, unlike us, it does not always know which parts to remove. Agnes nodded. But you do. Oh, hardly. She smiled. I simply notice which parts insist on remaining. The culprit departs calmly, not quietly, Mrs. Holloway was escorted at dawn. She did not resist. She walked with composure, boots sinking into snow, a woman who had done something unforgivable for reasons almost forgivable. As she stepped into the police motor car, Hugo Fletcher called after her, "Do take care of yourself, Beatrice. And if you require legal counsel, I know a chap who specializes in debts, cyanide, and seasonal regret." Agnes shook her head. That man could turn a funeral into a tea advert. Yes, Miss Marple agreed, but he would never turn a tea advert into a murder. His imagination is too loud for subtlety. Christmas restored the village did indeed restore calm. Evergreen Manor resumed its traditions, shortbread without almond essence, correspondence box locked, and the Colonel reading carols instead of letters for the remainder of the season. Victoria remained in Hollybrook until New Year, promising to help restore the manor's reputation, though the village privately believed Miss Marple had already done so. At Rose and Hearth, Agnes introduced a new winter tea blend named Snowfall and Secrets, a title approved unanimously by everyone except Constable, who felt the secret portion had been sufficiently addressed, and Miss Jane Marple, her Christmas stay nearing its end, packed her knitting, coat, and observational wisdom. She paused by the window one last time, snow sparkling like constellations upon the village green. A murder solved, she mused softly, is like a pattern completed. The stitches hold, the picture resolves, but one must never forget the dropped stitch that began it all. Reverend Ashford, overhearing, smiled warmly. "And yet you always pick them up." "Oh, someone must," she replied, opening her umbrella out of habit. "Otherwise the whole design unravels." Snow drifted past the glass, candles glowed, and Hollybrook celebrated the rest of Christmas in peace, intact, grateful, and ever so slightly wiser.